Did we just witness the WNBA's first $1 million trade? The WNBA has been around for 26 years, and in its history, it's seen some of the best women athletes come and go. At this moment, the largest contract seen in WNBA history is by Julianna Bonner, who's making a little under $1 million over 3 years. Now, this is pretty respectable, but if you've seen recent news, there's been another trade involving the WNBA, the trade of Brittney Griner coming back to America for Russian prisoner Viktor Bout. Now, he's known as the Merchant of Death, an arms dealer, an infamous arms dealer who's made millions of dollars selling guns in war-torn countries. Now, this could arguably be the biggest trade involving a WNBA athlete in history. Now, it technically could be worth millions of dollars given the history of Viktor Bout, given his business, but could it be a price worth more than monetary value? Maybe even life. When you really think about what comes out of this trade on a bigger scale, it really makes you think. Now, I want to take a look into how our minds understand business and also cognitive biases that can skew us to not understand what's really happening. I'm Nick Davenport, and thanks for tuning into Mental Breakdown channel. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe, and let's break this down using science and psychology as we always do. So I'm going to do this in a sport fashion as we would in a game, breaking down the different stats of each individual. Let's start off with Brittney Griner. She's also known as BG. She's 6'9". She's a WNBA center for the Phoenix Mercury. She's 32 years old. She was a first-round draft pick in 2013. She's also a two-time U.S. Olympic gold medalist, NCAA champion at Baylor University, a 3-time Russian League champion, a 2-time WNBA scoring champion, an 8-time WNBA All-Star, a WNBA champion, and she was serving a 9-year sentence in Russia that started in February 2022. Now let's look at Viktor Bout, also known as the Merchant of Death. He's a Russian arms dealer. He's 55 years old. He's a former KGB agent. He was a translator. He speaks 5 languages and claims to read over 15. He owned a fleet of 60 planes, which would allow him to become the world's most notorious arms dealer. He was wanted by numerous government agencies. He would supply weapons for numerous countries that were war-torn and would get demolished indirectly by his supplying of weapons and ammunitions. He was sentenced to 25 years in U.S. prison back in 2012. So now that we understand who we're dealing with, let's take a look at the commentary about this topic. Now, it's kind of mixed reviews across the board. Some people are upset that we didn't get someone else, such as the Marine Paul Whelan, and that's a whole other topic about his story. But some people think he should have been brought back. Others are kind of indifferent, like, hey, we got her back. That's great. Others are applauding because they said it's inhumane for her to even be detained over there. So regardless of what you feel about this, there's all types of talk about what's right or wrong. But what I want to look at is more so the mindset of why do people look at it in any kind of light. So one of the biggest things I noticed on the other side of the commentary was, what's the big deal that we let out Viktor Bout? Yeah, he's an arm dealer. Yeah, that's bad. But we got an American citizen back. And I agree. It's good to have an American citizen back. I'm proud to be American. I want to see people who are wrongfully put away. Even though she did break a law, 9 years was extreme. But in the same sentiment, I want to look at how this person who they gave back to the Russians impacts our whole world, because it's always a bigger picture. Now, when I see people say he's an arms dealer, I think they're belittling what this guy has actually done. You don't get the nickname Merchant of Death for small time crimes. I think a lot of times people hear the term arms dealer, they think like the movies when gangs or drug dealers are buying weapons off the street. You're thinking that guy in the corner, he opens up a box with a few pistols. I think that's what comes to people's mind. Now, I don't know if you understand, but this guy was like the Pablo Escobar of guns. Now, if you don't know who that is, he's one of the biggest drug dealers of all time. And this guy was on that magnitude of supplying guns across the world. And we're not just talking about guns. I should use the bigger term arms, because arms could be any type of weapon. So when people think about arms dealer, that's the availability heuristic bias. This just means that whatever comes to mind readily, you're going to think of. So when they think of arms dealer, they think of that street thug on the corner trying to hustle you some weapons up real quick. That's not what this is. He was supplying tens of thousands of AK-47s. Think about that. Automatic rifles going to war-torn countries, especially in Africa. That was one of his biggest buyers. There's even a movie about it called The God of War, starring Nicholas Cage, where they make light of this in a sense as he's just handing out guns galore to these people so they can kill each other. Also, millions of rounds of ammunition. When you think about that, these bullets, if they're getting bought, they're going to get shot eventually. If there's millions of them, even if it's not all of them, millions, even half, you're talking about millions of people either getting hit, seriously injured, or even killed. He also supplied airplanes that had rocket launchers. So you see how big a deal this is? Planes that are flying that can shoot other things out the air. And he also supplied surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs. If you don't know what these are used to shoot aircrafts out of the sky. So if a plane or a helicopter's flying overhead, these missiles launch up and blow them out the sky. This is what this guy was supplying to terrorist organizations, to violent factions in war-torn countries. This is what was going on. So we're not talking about a small-time crook here. So we got to understand the magnitude. And like I said, with that availability bias, our brains just think, oh, small-time arms dealer. No, this guy was on a large-scale, international magnitude, wanted across the world. And this is who they got for Brittney Griner. Now, people fall victim of the availability bias basically because it's easy for our brain to make sense of what we already think of when it immediately comes to mind. This is the same reason more people are scared to fly in planes than in cars, even though it's more likely to die in a car crash than in a plane crash. Plane crashes just happen on a bigger scale. They're over-reported, so we think about them on a larger scheme when they happen versus a car crash, which you might not make as much light of. Also, if you think of like a job like policeman versus fisherman, most people think the policeman is a more dangerous job, but you're more likely to die being a fisherman in the deep seas. Now, this is what that does. Matter of fact, the deal that he got caught on back in 2008 was a deal with a terrorist group in Colombia called FARC, and they basically set him up. He said to the people he was going to sell these surface-to-air missiles to that he was glad they were going to kill Americans. So he straight up admitted on record that he had every intent to help people to kill other Americans. So this guy is a big problem. So when they talk about, was this a bad trade? Let's look beyond Brittney Griner, the basketball player who he didn't get. Let's look at who was released from U.S. federal prison. Now, the DA sting that got Viktor Bout caught in the first place cost a lot of money, a lot of foot power, a lot of work that went into capturing him. I'm sure the people who helped set that up aren't that happy about him going free after only serving about 14 years of his 25-year sentence. You could argue, yes, he served 14 years, and 11 more wouldn't have been a big deal. But when you think about what he's capable of, that's a lot more lives that could be at risk out there. So we got to think about this on a grander scheme, because one person's life is definitely not less or more important, but it's kind of like the old trolley experiment, right? That's when you have one track with one person on it and another track with 5 people on it, and the train's coming towards the one with 5 people. Now you can turn the lever and it switches to the one person, you save 5, but now you have directly affected the death of one person, or you leave it alone and just let it take its course. That's kind of how this was. They had to make a choice, and sacrifice of one life versus others, the future implications of one guy of this magnitude and this infamy being freed. It's a lot that goes into it. So this wasn't as cut and dry as people made it. Some people try to make it a race thing, a woman thing, LGBTQ thing, whatever it was bigger than all of that. So these are things we got to take into consideration when we try to weigh how we decide. Now that you know all the information, this goes to another talking point I saw online was she shouldn't even been there in the first place. Now, the thing with this sentiment is, yeah, I agree. Being in Russia, having to play to make more money, people in general take on more jobs when they can't sufficiently support themselves. So WNBA players typically go to Europe or Russia, which is Eastern Europe, to play to make more money, even Asia. So I understand that being a thing. Now, the main issue with this statement is that most people attribute it to a discrepancy in pay between the NBA and WNBA caused by an unfair wage gap. Now, this is where the bandwagon effect can come in, because the wage gap argument of men making more than women has been around for decades. And I think a lot of people hop on this bandwagon because it does occur, but we got to understand why things occur. Now, since its inception, since 1996, the WNBA has taken about a $10 million a year loss for the last 26 years. Now, this really comes down to basic economics. Now, I'm an entrepreneur and I run my own business, so I understand this to some degree. So basically what this means is there's gross revenue. That's everything the WNBA makes. That's ticket sales, jerseys, TV deals, that type of revenue. Now, that's everything. Now, expenses is what it costs to pay the players, the people who coach, the referees, the people who upkeep the stadium, marketing, advertisers, all that stuff that has to be taken into consideration. Now, after that's calculated against the gross revenue, that's our net. That's how much we made after everything has been accounted for that we need to spend to keep this thing going. And that means they've been negative. They're in the red, meaning they have not made a profit, because when you have made more than you have spent, that's called a profit. And you can take that money and divide it against the shareholders or the league, whatever revenue share scheme they have set up. That's how it's broken down. But since they're not making money, that means the league is being actually subsidized by the NBA. So for the last 26 years, the NBA has basically been paying to keep the WNBA going. Now, a lot of arguments have been saying that they need to put more marketing towards the WNBA, that the men get way more advertising dollars to put their names and their brand out there. And that may be true, but it's more than that. Like I said, business is about supply and demand. Now, you can put out millions, if not billions of dollars, such as the pharmaceutical industry, And doesn't mean that people are going to understand or know the product or even want to buy it. For example, I'm going to put on the screen the top 5 pharmaceuticals and the companies that make them. You tell me if you know any of them. Now, if you do, great. But if you don't, guess what? The pharmaceutical industry spends billions with a B on marketing. And if you don't know those, that just shows you it doesn't always go the way you think it will. You can throw all types of money at marketing, but if people don't truly want the product or don't have enough interest, you got to change your approach. And this is what's happening with the WNBA. The interest is just not there. And a lot of people keep attributing this to sexism and no one cares about the women. But I have to debate that argument because as per the league commissioner, he stated that majority of the WNBA fans are older men. So that being said, where's the discrepancy really coming from? So I did some digging. I looked up the top views for the housewife shows and Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Now, they actually average about 1.5 to 2 million viewers per episode. Then I looked up what the WNBA does per game. It's about 300 some thousand. So 300,000 to 1.5 to 2 million. That's over 5 to 6 times more viewers per game versus the WNBA per episode of The Real Housewives or Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Now, the reason I bring this up because their prime demographic is ages 18 to 40. So you got to understand, this is the market that spends the most money on anything. And the name of the game is how can it generate profit? If you get more viewers, you can sell more advertising, more TV deals, make more money. Or you have more people coming to the games, or you have more jersey sales. So all in all, more people coming, seeing, watching, viewing, sharing, the more the WNBA can grow. But do you see this discrepancy? Now, I did a little more digging using Brittney Griner since she's in the spotlight right now. She has about 500,000 followers on Instagram. Then I looked up Kim Kardashian. She has about 330 million followers. That's as much people that lives in the whole United States combined. So she has enough people than most countries. We're one of the most populated countries on earth. So that's how many people follow her. So once again, supply and demand. The argument is not about who deserves what or who's not getting enough. It's about who wants to watch it. And apparently they rather watch Keeping Up the Kardashians, who leverage their brand very well through their clothing, their show in itself, their makeup brands. So they're growing their businesses. And that same approach can be taken with the WNBA if they can only get those type of people watching. But that's where you see the problem is they're not. So the argument really shouldn't be about she shouldn't have been over there. The people don't want to watch women's sports. It's more so how you get more people into women's sports. Maybe you could leverage some of these big time celebrities who are going to NBA games. They're courtside there. So where's the problem here? So if women wanted to grow, it's not just a man issue. It's men and women. Keyword on the women because that's who's not really going to these games or watching. So that being said, when Kelsey Plum talked about rev share, all in all, going back to basic economics, there's no money to share. If they want to do that, then they would actually have to pay because typically when you're the person funding a business, if you take a loss, you have to eat that. But since you're their employees, essentially, they don't really have to worry about that. They just take their salary and go about their day. So it's an argument that I understand because they want to get that better income. But at the same time, you have to understand the economics and it doesn't really go together in the way they want it to. So how do we bring this all full circle? I've talked about the Merchant of Death, all the things he's done. I've talked about Brittney Griner being taken prisoner, getting traded back to America. We talked about how people get confused on how things are processed in their brain. Well, all in all, it's still basic business. The Merchant of Death, Viktor Bout, he basically saw a need. Countries were at war with each other. They needed weapons, and he didn't care who he sold them to. So basically, he said, I'll supply them to you. He grew his business. The market needed it. He supplied it, and it kept growing. You recoup, make profit, put more into the business, and keep it going. And that's how he grew his fleet, became one of the most notorious arms dealers on earth. Now, this may sound crazy, but this could actually be leveraged to help the WNBA. Hear me out now. A lot of eyes are watching now because Brittney Griner's name, outside of people who knew about her because they watched basketball in general, let alone the WNBA, they now know of her. Now, the next thing they do needs to bring some attention because they say there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? So maybe they should use this chance to capitalize off of everything that's been going because at the end of the day, it's all business. So thanks for tuning in, guys. This was a crazy one to break down because I had to do my research to understand the Viktor Bout guy, Brittney Griner, the whole situation, how this all came to be, and help you guys understand it. So let me know your 2 cents. What do you think about this trade? Do you think it was fair? Do you think it should have been with someone else? Whatever your concerns are, leave them in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe. And as always, thanks for letting me break it down and get your mind right.